So I think Anita said it really well. Whether you know it or not, you have a culture within your organization, and a lot of this information may be bigger than where you are now in terms of scale or the amount of employees that you're engaging, those sorts of things. But the hope is that it's planting some seeds, so you're thinking about this stuff early and often. When you've got two co-founders and maybe an intern on your team, you've got a certain way of communicating, a certain way of acting, certain expectations of each other, a vibe in the office, all of those things that are creating a culture, whether you know it or not. And the idea is as you start growing and putting other pieces into your organizational structure, are you doubling down on this culture you guys have created there, or are you intentionally determining what needs to be created to be an organization that people want to join and stay with and work for and grow and feel passionate about? And that's really the key to a lot of the culture work going on. I think there's I think who said it? I think it was the Salesforce CEO, but the quote is, "Culture eats strategy all day long." And if you have a culture that isn't aligned with what your employees want, with how you communicate, if there are issues there, or even toxicity at the worst case, you really are eating up all your bandwidth dealing with that rather than moving your organization forward. And so you'll find in whatever's called the Great Resignation right now, I call it the Great Reshuffle, passion fit, mission fit, culture fit. These are the things that are at the top of the list, along with compensation, benefits, and flexibility. And we'll go through some of those too. But this is all in the lens of thinking about attracting and retaining people as you continue to grow the organization. So this is sort of where I specialize in my career with my company and with other advising work I do, is on talent strategy. And talent strategy I define as anything from who are you as an employer in terms of brand and attraction, all the way through to what is your acquisition process? How do you reach out, recruit, network, vet? What is that technology stack within that? What is the candidate experience? Through to successfully onboarding, retention, career path, and all of those things inside an organization that help employees stay engaged and challenged. And so that's where I live in my career. And it's not an HR function. It's not solely an HR function. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to see. It's definitely a shift in perspective from how a lot of organizations are set up, but it really should be an executive and operational led function. So whoever is thinking about talent strategy should either sit in operations or support operations, and report to operations. And marketing and HR are the key collaborators to this work. Marketing in terms of storytelling, internal communications, employer brand, all of those pieces are so important. Even ad campaign, understanding ad campaigns, understanding sponsored ads, boosted ads, these are all part of what you're doing to be a good recruiter nowadays. And then HR is a key collaborator in compliance, in that people engagement side, in compensation and benefits competitiveness, all of those pieces of the puzzle, and then HR data, coaching the coaches, those sorts of things. So I say that ahead of time because I think it gets lost as this kind of like HR checkbox in a lot of organizations. And HR is a big, huge, people operations is a big, huge, giant umbrella. And there's a ton of things to think about within it. So culture, here's the definition: the shared values, goals, and characteristics of an organization. More simply, the shared ethos. Company culture is alive in the attitudes, interactions, decisions, practices, and behaviors of the organization and its employees. And every organization, like Anita said, has a culture, whether they know it or not. It could be intentionally created. It could just be happening without you really thinking about it. And it has a huge impact on your ability to execute on strategy, implement change and achieve organizational goals. It can really eat up your entire day if it's not in alignment with where you need to head. So let's talk about intentional culture. And I kind of think about it in 4 buckets. So intentional culture, connecting your values to specific behaviors. So people know what is expected, what's encouraged and rewarded within the team and the organization. The 4 buckets I think about alignment. So alignment of values, goals, passion, purpose, expectations, all of these things are aligned. So you'll see when you see broken cultures within an organization, there may be ways people are rewarded or incentivized to be misaligned with what they actually say their values are, right? And that really causes a lot of issues. Connection, that is connecting your teams together, connecting them to your mission, understanding what your teams want, engagement, showing up for each other. How do you reset after setbacks? How do you just show up as a team is really important. Feedback is a huge piece of culture. One of the biggest shifts, I think, that some generations in leadership that have been in leadership for a while, one of the biggest shifts is being comfortable with a culture of feedback, up and down feedback. And that's something that is new to a lot of leaders that have been around a while. And it's something that is increasingly important to newer generations coming into the workforce. And so we do a lot of work around feedback processes and systems and reactions to feedback and how that goes within an organization. And then conflict is a part of culture. Conflict is simply energy created by the gap between what we want and what we're experiencing. And it's going to happen. Conflict can be healthy or it can be toxic. And so really, how are you going to harness that energy to either move forward and solve problems and challenge each other or not? And so these are some buckets around intentional culture. So I won't go through this Q&A with y'all, but it's really good thought work to do. And so when I'm talking about this with other organizations, we'll start with, what are your values? So who on this call has defined values in their organization so far? I think values are something people are looking at right now if you're talking about talent attraction and talent retention. And so I would encourage everybody to really think deeply about those and holistically so that they can add those to the mission statement and make sure they're hung out up front. I know for my organization, they're on every about page that I need, and I use them in lots of different materials. So the first bucket, I'm going to just put them all up here so you can review them. But, the first piece of it all is aligning teams. And so does each team member know how their role fits and its impact on the whole? Everyone that has a meeting with me, I'm going to start with, what does this person contribute to the team? What do they need to deliver or do for your organization? And everything else is reverse engineered from that. The job description, the expectation setting, the orientation and training, the evaluating of the employee, all starts with that first expectation of what they need to deliver. As co-founders, when you guys are looking at, okay, now we're adding to the team, the first thing you need to do is, what roles do we play on the team first? What are our lanes and areas of responsibility? And then what does my title need to be as we grow? Where do we need to plug in expertise, plug in skills and experience so that we can then deliver on the other things we want to create through this organization? That can be one of the hardest things, is first saying, who am I in this world? I know I've talked to a founder who said, my passion is around teaching and developing customers, consulting with them. Well, then your role is not a CEO because CEOs don't have time to do that, right? And so maybe we need to find you a co-founder that's going to be a CEO. these are all kind of the decisions and discussions that you start to have as you think about how your organization is going to come together and get formed and where you're going to head. So start with what is the role and what is the impact on the organization as a whole, and then share that with the team member. Make sure they know what is expected of them, how their team depends on them, what they contribute that's of value to the organization, what you'll be measuring. Communicate your values early and often. So to Steve's point, it doesn't have to be a part of the mission, but Susan and I would definitely say, yes, you should. And it would behoove you to, right? And so you can communicate it on the job ad, you can communicate it in orientation, you can even communicate it through how you interview and vet. And then all the way through ongoing in all of your meetings, you can be aligned with your values in different ways. Set and share a vision. And so a lot of you guys do your vision and mission statements, but then there's quarterly visions, there's annual visioning, there's strategic priorities, there's visions for what the team contributes. Make sure everybody's on the same page and you're communicating those. Create an index of resources. This is probably it's not rocket science, right? It's like give people the resources they need so they're empowered to get their job done. But it's literally the hardest thing to do when you're first growing your company, because all of the resources are here. And to get in the habit of externalizing and indexing and creating templates and resources as you go, as you learn new information, as processes start to develop, that's a really powerful habit to start early and often, because then you already have communication tools of processes, systems, best practices, next practices, or future facing practices, right? Because you're catching them as you go and you're creating some sort of index or resource template for it. Even within my organization, we rely on a pretty hefty tech stack. And so my job still is to get that more seamless and resourced better, so that their day-to-day job isn't just managing technology either. So is there a way to even index your technology and the apps being used, or dashboard them in some sort of way? These are all things to think about so that you're setting your people up to be able to do their job and empowered to do it efficiently and effectively. Communicate goals, individual goals, team goals, and organizational goals. So maybe really a no-brainer to say, hey, here's what your goal is, and here's how I'm going to measure you. But it also makes sense to talk about what is the goal of the team you're on or the organization, and how does your goal impact that? What role do you play in achieving all of that? And then check in on progress. What is the cadence of your check-ins, your temperature checks, your touchstones, your evaluating times, coaching, all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then this is the biggest one: reward aligned behavior and coach misaligned behavior. In this total crazy day-to-day, if you're not connected and checked in and know what's going on, you may be rewarding misaligned behavior and not even know it. You may be afraid to coach because you're not as comfortable with coaching or conflict. And you haven't learned how to have positive coaching. And so you miss a bunch of things, and other employees are watching. I think one of the most dangerous things happening through this great reshuffle or great resignation is employers have convinced themselves they can't hire anyone, and they hold on to toxic people. And really good people don't stay with toxic people. If you manage from a place or coach from a place of distrust and all of those other kind of toxic traits, maybe because there's going to be people, there's going to be employees that don't do the right thing all the time. But if you manage everybody from that place, you will then only retain people who live in that place, because people who don't live that way aren't going to put up with being treated that way, right? So really, what is that cadence of rewarding aligned behavior and then coaching? And what does everybody see you reward? Because that's your culture, not what you say your values are. And then that's part of it, recognizing accomplishments. So connecting teams. I went through this really with the idea of remote teams in mind, but some of you may have in-person teams as well. But more and more, it's hybrid and remote, and that's the biggest challenge to staying connected. So team connection creates a culture that's not only inclusive, but provides a sense of belonging and promotes innovation and growth. So when everybody kind of got locked down and went home during the peak of, or the beginning of the pandemic, we learned some really like working from home. But we also had a lot of, I think it contributed to a lot of this great resignation stuff that's going on, where they didn't have the colleagues, the connection with colleagues. They hadn't yet pivoted or built those ways to connect with each other remotely. And they realized they liked their team, they just didn't like their job. So when they were home just doing their job and the team wasn't around anymore, they were like, what am I doing every day? So that piece of the puzzle of liking who you work with, connecting who you work with, being collegial, building and collaborating, it's a really important part of retention. And we had a really nice 2-year experiment around that. And so, how are you creating connection in your teams? I know this is a silly one. I did this for one headquarter that I was working with. They doubled in size at the HQ office. And there was all these resources and collaborators and partners in other departments that each position needed. So as a talent strategy, we mapped out every role and we decided who should they have coffee with, who should they Q&A, who should they get to know, what other resources should they have at hand or understand. And we made them find them through a bingo card. We gave them a name and title. They had to find them in the directory and make an appointment to meet with them. Those sorts of things. And then at the end of the day, when the bingo card was done, they got all this cool swag. And it sounds silly and a little bit juvenile, but even the higher level people were then empowered to reach out. And we were sort of giving them a roadmap of who do you need to know in your first 30 days. And it was kind of fun. It's an idea. There's lots of ways to do that. It doesn't have to be bingo. Be intentional about break rooms and gathering spaces. This can even be digital gathering spaces. I've seen some organizations have a Zoom room that is just always on. And so if someone wants to have some tea or take a break, they could see who else is sitting in there and chat. But what other kind of spaces are you creating for people to chat and to be around each other more organically? Leverage technology. We all know this. We're all trying this. Some work, some don't. Promote common interests. Do you guys internally fundraise? Do you have a common cause you go after together? Are there clubs? Is there a book club? Different things that are important to keep people kind of connecting and moving forward together. I've seen incredible things come through fundraising. I know here locally, both Leukemia Lymphoma Society and United Way make a really big deal out of fundraising contests within organizations and do a lot of really fun team building stuff around it. And then peer-to-peer learning opportunities. Do you have somebody who's just really great at what they do, an incredible subject matter expert? Highlight them and give them a chance to share knowledge with their peers. It makes everybody feel good and it keeps everybody sharp. And, think about, when do these connection opportunities need to happen? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it annually? What are the difference between those connection opportunities? So for me, my teams, we do a lot of heads down work. We're doing email outreach. We're doing research. We're out in the market all day long. Daily connection is a little disruptive, maybe, because we're kind of in it. But we have to stay in touch with each other weekly, or else we start to get lost from each other. And so what does that weekly touch base look like? And then, monthly, quarterly, annually, what are the differences there and how do you get together and stay together as a team? Creating a culture of feedback. So one of my clients who hired me for some advising, they had a big retention issue, just like everybody else in the last year. And, they looked at compensation. They weren't really off the market. They were really pretty equitable with everybody. They looked at, the benefits were pretty good. but they didn't know what was going on. And part of it was they didn't have a culture of feedback to know. So make sure you have one-on-ones with your key reports. Those can be, mine are weekly with my team. It can be weekly, it can be bi-weekly, it can be monthly. And then also something we've integrated, annually, we wrote an annual survey for this organization. So they were kind of blindfolded going, maybe we'll do these benefits, maybe we'll pay this more, and hoping they got it right. And I said, no, before we look at any compensation, any benefits, let's ask. And we rolled out their first annual survey, and we had them sort benefits that they'd be most interested or value the most. And so we could really target in on that. And then afterwards, we took that survey and we created all of these visual stories to give back to the employees so they felt heard. And they saw what got the majority of responses. And then we talked about the action plan to implement these. So it wasn't just, we asked you, it was, we asked you, we heard you, and now we have strategic priorities to follow. Thank you for your feedback. And of course, we didn't survey on things we wouldn't be able to deliver. So that's a key to it. But, staying in touch and understanding that. So in one-on-ones, is there a flow that you can also receive that feedback, not just give feedback? In the annual survey, is there opportunity that there's some, anonymity for them to be honest in certain feedback? And then we started stay interviews. And stay interviews are the concept of asking somebody about what would make them leave before they do. It's a really interesting thing, and it's happening more and more. I think everybody's probably heard of an exit interview, but by then they're leaving. And so we took a typical one-on-one time. You start with the leader of the organization, and then you flow down from there. They do a stay interview with their reports. Those reports do a stay interview with their reports. And it's just part of a one-on-one every 6 months or so to just check in and say, how are you doing? What's going on? And it's around, what are your personal goals? What are our goals for you? How fulfilled are you? Are you at capacity? Do we need to redistribute some work? All of those pieces that might make somebody leave. And so those are exciting too. Even in a meeting. So how do you conduct your meetings? Do you ask for feedback before a meeting on the agenda? And then post meeting, how do you get feedback and answers and the things you wanted to get out of the meeting? That's creating a culture of feedback. Stay and exit interviews, annual surveys, constantly being clear about expectations and what's going on, coaching, feedback, training. I mean, Susan, you might be able to speak to this, but even some of my clients are kind of going back to that internal employee newsletter to talk about organizational goals and highlight people and keep everybody on the same page, because people got so disconnected, they didn't know how they fit into the bigger puzzle or bigger picture. And so they're kind of rolling back newsletters to get back to that.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you have to remember to market to your staff in the same way you might market outside. So you want certain behaviors and responses from your staff, and you can't just sort of throw them out there and assume that those things are going to happen. So talking to them, understanding them, letting them know what's going on. I mean, you really have to look at your employees like another target audience for your company.
Yep. This is why I love working with Susan. This is why usually if you talk to me, I say, and make sure you make an appointment with Susan too. And then, the other piece of the puzzle is meaningful performance evaluations. There's a checkbox evaluation that happens annually, maybe, that you do. Is it meaningful? Is it impactful? Does it move things forward? For me, anytime I'm helping someone create an evaluation template, it's simple, it goes to the core of the job, and then it leaves space for opportunity to develop and goal setting, to keep the ball moving forward. So always take a lens to your evaluations and make sure that they're meaningful and getting to the core of the behavior you want. Yes, thank you, Steve. The stay interviews, that's absolutely the point, is to not be surprised and not know that your employees were thinking these things and you're totally caught off guard. I can do a whole 3-day workshop on succession planning and how everybody blew it in COVID and with the resignation stuff, but it's huge. Don't be caught off guard, and always have 3 to 5 moves on your bench to get ready to move it forward. That's not always financially realistic at the early stages of an organization, but the more you understand that, the better prepared you are to be there one day. Okay. Conflict. This is the big one. I'm someone who is not conflict averse, so I don't personally have challenges in this area, but there are lots and lots of people in the world that are. And so it's really important to decide how conflict fits in your culture, because it has to happen. Agreeing on everything is not real, and it's not an echo chamber is not beneficial to your organization. So when you're talking about conflict resolution and embracing conflict in a work environment, make sure you're showcasing that yourself, that it's not emotional, I hate to say not emotional, because I don't want you guys to be robots, but that it's not personal, that it is, you understand this is something that needs to be addressed to keep moving things forward. Showcase that as a leader. That's the starting point. From there, set ground rules. So if a couple employees are having a major issue and you're going to mediate that, let's say, you need to say, what outcome do we need to achieve from this? Which is going to be, an answer or a decision or a delivery, whatever that is. Okay, this is why we're here, and this is the optimal outcome. And then define the rules to get there. We're not going to name call. We're not going to talk about things outside of the topic at hand. Whatever those rules need to be. Carefully listen and consider all sides. It's amazing how much toxic conflict dissolves when people feel heard. Even if you don't agree and move forward with what they said, listening is a huge piece of healthy conflict. Calmly discuss conflicting perspectives, separate out defensiveness, emotions, anxieties from the disagreement, and really think about the topic at hand. And make sure that you're the person, if you're the mediator, that keeps bringing everybody back to that touchstone. Clarify areas of agreement. So I love the Oreo cookie. Well, we agree on this. We still got to work this out. And this is also a place that we agree on. So we're good. Let's keep working at it, right? And then also make sure you're agreeing on the facts of the matter from each perspective. And then be open, resourceful, and persistent. Conflict is going to happen, and it's the closed door and the wall to it can create more harm than good sometimes. Even though we're all very busy, it's like the last thing we want to deal with. Our idea is incredible. We don't want to hear any conflicting ideas around it. You've got to stay open, and you've got to be able to create a culture where this is okay. Because those organizations where people can challenge each other and they can come to best solutions through that conflict are winning the game every time. Here's some really quick trends around culture for this year. All of the data is telling us that when you're looking at talent attraction or retention, people want flexibility right now. Particularly if you're talking about a diversified workforce and gender equity. This was a tough 2 to 3 years for everybody. It was a really tough 2 to 3 years for women who had to carry also the emotional role and caretaking role in their families. And so the workforce lost a lot of women over COVID. And as they re-enter, there's some decisions around flexibility and balance that they're going to be making depending on where they join. So how can you define where and when employees work for each role? And it doesn't have to be a blanket company policy. Not everybody has to come in and everybody leaves, but it has to be a policy that is based on the work that needs to be delivered. It can't be totally subjective. So think about the roles and what really needs to get done and where you can provide flexibility that makes sense for your organization. Rebuilding connection. So we talked about this. There was fragmentation. There was, pivoting to remote without any kind of understanding of how to stay connected through that. People are missing connection. It doesn't always mean they want to get back to work, but even some people want to get back to the office now because of that. But think about how you're going to build connection, reestablish bonds, connect back to your mission, and help people feel purposeful and passionate again about where you guys are headed together. Revisiting engagement, really take a new look at how you measure work and how you look at engagement. So was work measured before by being on time and sitting in your desk for an X amount of hours? Because that doesn't work in a flexible culture. How do you measure actual delivery of work? And then what is great work for each role? And how does someone showcase that they're engaged with you and your organization in a new way if you're looking at flexible work environments? More personalized recognition is a new thing. I think this is super generational. Gen Z is getting into the workforce. I think the first ones turned 18 a couple years ago or just before COVID. And so, here's where you've got a population that is very risk averse. They are going toward large brands that they know and that mom and dad are going to be happy with. Cities and parts of the country that they know and mom and dad are going to feel safe with. And they're, very much into personal identity. And so these are all things that you've got to think about as you're having and connecting multi-generations in your organization. Boomers are still working. They're working longer than their previous generation, all the way to now Gen Z. And you're spanning the Xers, millennials to Gen Z. And so that's a lot of area to cover in terms of generational expectations. And so, how do you get personalized in how you recognize people? And then the importance of technology and culture. If you're talking about connection, you're talking about flexibility, you're talking about engagement, you're talking about reward systems and gamifying, you've got to talk about technology. So how do you get all this done through technology? And having those systems already in place are really important. I think about how hard it is to find CPAs. Public accounting is one of the worst places to recruit for right now. They are in so much pain in terms of talent and workforce. And all of them are saying, well, we're going to innovate and you can work from home. And they're hanging out all of these things that are going to make them seem more flexible. And maybe 10% of them have actually built the technology to do that so far. And so they're really not able to walk that talk. And so, how are you thinking ahead in terms of how you're connecting your people through technology? And really quick, I know I just have a few minutes, but when you talk about personalizing engagement or personalizing rewards or recognition, this is kind of a cool slide from the Tanner Institute about different types of workers. So you've got a socializer, you have a tasker, a builder, a coaster, an achiever. All of them have space in your organization. Now, startups may not have room for a coaster, but in larger organizations, not everybody has to be an achiever because that's way too much. Sometimes those coasters are those ones that they're showing up, they're doing what they need to, and that's okay. So you have to understand who you've got and then where their focuses are, connections, strategy, achievement, what are their focuses and motivators? How do they work? So like the coaster, they're practical, they're low touch, they get stuff done just in time. I work really well with coasters in a lot of ways, because I don't have a lot of time for high touch sometimes. And then I need like one or two achievers that are pushing me too. And that mix can be really healthy and interesting. And then a builder who can like do what I'm visioning, right? If I'm the founder. So think about all of those pieces of the puzzle and how they feel about themselves too. I think it's always interesting that achievers have a negative self-esteem on this diagram, but that's why they are so driven to achieve. Maybe it can be a driving force for some people. And then I'll share these with you, but these are just some ways to recognize, award, and give some of those different kind of working styles. I don't want to say they're personality types because they're really not. They're just working styles. And people's working styles can change through their life or through where they're at and how they feel about the role they're playing in their career. So that's it.